Um, Hello, and thank you for tuning in. My name is Touring News, and I am joined by my friend Rob here, who is going to introduce himself in a little bit and give his background. Today, we're going to be discussing energy systems and what are some of the future implications for the way that we create and store energy. So, I will allow Rob to do an introduction because he can do better than I'll be able to.
Sure. My name's Rob. I'm writing my dissertation on power systems and cyber attacks against them. And my working background is transmission power specifically.
Yeah, and
So,
really just thank you so much for giving us some of your time. I really do appreciate it.
no, I'm a big fan of your work. Most people don't talk to energy people. So,
Yeah, then this is a good way to get into it. So you said that you're focusing a lot on cybersecurity systems and their reliability and so forth. What was it, I guess, that got you into wanting to go this route rather than something else within the energy generation line of work?
happenstance mostly. uh, so, renewable energy and just kind of reducing carbon footprints throughout the energy sphere is really what drove me into my thesis. I'm at a university that's really been doing a lot of work on it. And one of the advisors I've been speaking with just between classes and stuff is working on this. And he kind of pitched what was going on and what the implications were. And it was just really interesting on the security front. Um,
Is
Go ahead.
it something that we like are completely underestimating? Because I know for me, I don't really. I mean, I think about it from time to time, but I don't exactly. Yeah, we always hear like, oh, well, they could do a cyber attack here, they could do a cyber attack there, but I don't think that it's really something that is at least within the mind of the person in the United States. So, am even I underestimating, the amount of vulnerabilities that are out there? So, could you give like a brief summary of what some of your research has found?
Sure. My research focuses on the grid stability, not necessarily the attack itself. We just assume that the attack can happen because in 2016 there was an attack on Ukraine and they took down their grid for about, I think, 200,000 customers uh, for multiple hours in the dead of winter. Loss of most of things, lighting and everything on December 20th is a horrible idea, let alone if you're in a hospital. So that happened. And what they did is they defeated an air gap with some spear phishing attacks, which is horrifying in some ways. And then they managed to open a few breakers, which took parts of the grid offline. Then the real fun part is they, I don't know how the technical term is, but they jammed the phone lines going to technical
Mm.
support. So you couldn't even report the outages, which means it's even harder for the power companies to see there's something wrong. They have to rely on demand curves and like lagging information, which makes it kind of scary when you think about it. You can't even report you don't have electricity in the dead of winter, and that was 2016. So
For myself and others that may not know, can you just quickly define what spear phishing is and how this provided a security vulnerability?
sure, it's just a really aggressive way of phishing. You click this link, and in this case, they just sent emails to people at the company who would click on a link, and somehow that made it through an air gap onto a just a separate um, internet for the electrical systems. It's it's I understand it's more or less the same technique used to hack Hillary and the Democratic emails. You,
Hmm.
you send a document, it's malicious.
Is that one of like the main ways that would be going about it, or what are some other security vulnerabilities that are existing?
Well, we've seen Stuxnet in Iran. They used a USB on the ground. Same idea. It, if anything, the spear phishing attack is much more scary because what do you say? The USB, okay, you pick it up, you can have like a terminal where you plug USB in to see if it works.
Hmm.
But what do you do if you just have emails that somebody clicks on?
Right.
That's almost worse. And then again, it's hard to explain how scary it is that they got into an isolated internet network connecting all these breakers and stuff, and then they could control the breakers. That's that blows my mind. Like I know that it happens, and I don't understand how.
So, what have you been, I guess, like working within in order to provide better stability? and kind of like counter some of these system shutdowns that are potentials, I would say.
I can't release too much yet.
Okay.
It's NDA'd until it gets published for a few reasons. Specifically, I'm using proprietary software, and I can tell you that uh, we're just I'm trying to figure out what can push a grid offline, what can trigger protection systems, so we know what our boundaries are that we have to work against, and that includes, is this feasible? But as I said, it's happened, so it's feasible.
Yeah, I. Do you know of any that have happened like in the United States, or has there been anything that you've seen kind of happening over here? I think that you're based in Europe somewhere.
Yeah, I'm in Germany right now. I have not heard of a malicious attack aimed at the electrical grid in the US or Europe. I don't really want to speculate on why. I don't think it's because they're much safer.
Okay. Yeah, so that's I think like a really good introduction into what you're working on. And then I did send like a list of questions over to you. And
Yeah,
would you maybe just want to like grab one of them that you think would be a decent transition, and then we can you can kind of like set the pace of what we're talking about, since you kind of like saw some of the ones that we were trying to go for.
yeah. Well, let's start with the modern nuclear reactors. Are they less prone to cyber attacks?
Okay.
I would say that you're looking at their protections wrong. Yes, they turn themselves off, but that's not the concern. What happens if I just open the breakers and they're now off the grid? Now
Mm,
you've lost all of that generation, which can destabilize a grid very quickly. Uh, that's really the view I look at. Not can you spin the motor up or something like that, but does it stay on the grid? So I like generation methods that are more decentralized because it's a lot just more difficult to break into 600 different breakers than it is two.
what would be an example of a more decentralized style?
Just in general, wind, solar, those are very decentralized. If you want to talk about still using fossil fuels, smaller combined cycle plants are generally good, decentralized because they can be placed around the countries a lot, and then smaller coal as well.
Okay.
My preference is DER. DER is distributed energy resources, but it specifically means like wind and solar for the most part.
Okay. So you're saying that they're decentralized because they're smaller units, or is it decentralized because like each photovoltaic would be its own, independent from all the others?
Photovoltaics may be the worst example on that, but
Okay.
like wind turbines all generate and then send their energy somewhere else.
Okay.
So, and offshore, each one of those is a separate breaker. It gets a little simple. There are substations that you really need to protect, but I've designed some substations before, and we had some lovely protections. One of them was three different manufacturers were required. So we had a primary, a secondary, and then a tertiary breaker response. And they were all had to be manufactured in different years using different chipsets from different manufacturers.
Hmm.
So there's a lot of, what do you say, redundancy and protection just inherently there. And I'm sure that does protect against this stuff to some degree.
Somebody I just saw in the channel kind of asked like a question like, what are some of the vulnerabilities for coal and other oils? And I'm gonna try to like frame it into like something different to see if we can find like a specific example. Is there Have you looked into the ability to like over pressurize, like natural gas pipelines, or like something like this? Like, is this like a vulnerability that people need to discuss as well, with like kind of like supercharging a pipe that then would cause it to combust and explode?
I can't speak to how those tend to work, but theoretically, yes, if you can defeat these, like if you can defeat the security systems, you can change the operational parameters. This is less likely to happen on something that's actually monitored by a human, but pipelines for gas are not monitored by humans generally. So that's a very good example.
Okay. Damn, I just had. Oh, I had a big one that I wanted to ask. Ah, okay. EMPs. Does this like,
Okay.
yeah? Does this factor into like what you're thinking about at all? And can you even explain like in simple terms what an EMP would be? And are they scalable? Are there governments that have them? Do we think that private individuals have them? Or okay, what's kind of like your thoughts on those?
EMPs exist and they are an issue for electronics. The scale of them differs. So it's one thing to have a guy walk up to you and hit your cell phone with you from next to you. That is possible, that happens. It's a real concern in warfare as well. Uh, just you can wrap a bunch of coils around a battery, flip a switch, just turn it off. On a larger scales, that becomes less likely, but then you need more power to do that. And I've never heard of a large scale EMP outside of a nuclear weapon.
Okay.
And if we're talking about nuclear weapons going off for the EMP effect, I'd say we've already missed the boat on the
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah.
That
Interesting.
doesn't mean that electromagnetic attacks aren't useful. You can use them to, yeah, coronal mass ejections are something that are concerns. I'm not necessarily concerned about that on the grid in terms of lasting damage,
Is a
but I promise
coronal
you it can disconnect the grid.
is that like a solar flare? What
Yeah.
you just okay? Yeah. I there are going to be some terms that I'm not entirely familiar with. I am obviously not an energy grid system specialist.
Yeah, no
Um,
worries. That's
so,
me.
so yeah, thank you for breaking them down. So okay, yeah, that was good because my question was about I was told by an individual for the nuclear that like they're designing the cooling rods to be magnetic, and when like the temperature changes, like so on and so forth, the magnet drops and falls in. But you did show how that's like thinking about the security in the wrong way. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you for shifting that one in. What would be
I will tell you, I like nuclear power. The concern I have with it on this front has nothing to do with its safety. I think active cooling is much worse than passive cooling, but they're using passive cooling now, so that's the answer right there
Mhm.
for me.
So actually, the Nick or Dr. Nick Toron, the individual we had on before to talk about nuclear, his company just got a $160 million seed funding or grant to continue their work and develop into a new reactor. So that was good news.
Good.
Out of
I hope he has some great success. I love the idea of it.
yeah, wonderful. What would be the next question that you want to grab out of here?
Well, we can, real quick, you asked a question about copper and
Yeah.
transmission lines. So I do underground transmission predominantly, which means I put things where you don't see them, hopefully. And for us, copper is the most effective because when you're going underground, you usually cost is already out the window. It's really expensive to buy land and put stuff underground for a few reasons. So you usually use copper for transmission level uh, power transfer. Otherwise, we use aluminum. For overhead, the stuff you see normally, usually that's, I think it's ASCR, it's aluminum covered with steel. So you use steel for a lot of like heat transfer and stuff, and then you use a little bit of aluminum in the middle.
Okay. This will actually kind of transition into one of the other ones that I wanted to ask. I'm going to make a hypothetical. Let's say that somehow I get 500 square miles of land in the Nevada desert, and I just want to put photovoltaics across the entire thing. Where are we at in terms of storage and transmission to just build like one of those and then maybe like one or two other like huge energy generation sources and then transport it out across to the entire US. So a few things that I'd be interested in is that providing a bigger security vulnerability because like you were saying now it's not decentralized as much, now you're just like kind of centralized, but also is it even feasible, are we losing a lot of electricity as you transport it across the country? I'll let you go from there.
Sure. I would suggest if you're going to build the infrastructure of cross US solar, all the transmission lines, you'd be better suited to put roughly 4 or 5 different plants instead of one in just Nevada,
Okay.
so that you're spreading out the generation at the peak time further around. So you have, instead of 1 hour of peak generation in Arizona, you have 4 hours spread across 4 different chunks of the US. One of the good and bad things about solar power is it's really, it generates a lot for a little bit of money at peak usage. The problem is peak usage and peak generation don't always line up. So you want to do levels of generation that can offset each other. So if you're overproducing on the East Coast, but you're not producing any because the sun's not up in California, you want to overproduce in Florida and then kind of shift that over to California to offset the low levels of energy used before they wake up. Likewise, California is going to be producing sunlight energy much longer than New York is because New York's just going to see the sun go down first. So you want to be able to kind of shift that around. And that acts as a kind of virtual battery, we'll call it, because you still have generation that's being taken across these giant masses. And you don't need to build storage for that. You're just naturally taking advantage of this. there will be losses, and then we can talk into different technologies for mitigating those. I do HVDC power mostly, which is lower in losses by about half than AC. And while we're still talking relatively small losses, on the scale of a countrywide distribution, DC is definitely the better way to go.
Do we have any of that in the United States, or aren't we running on AC?
You have some DC interconnections. They're generally used for interconnecting different areas, like Texas to MISO. MISO is the Midwest I don't know what MISO stands for. It's like Missouri and Iowa. They're interconnected with an HVDC backbone. The East Coast is connected as well because HVDC backbones mean you don't have to sync your frequency up. You can just do that on either side of the HVDC interconnect. It's also why Europe is often interconnected through HVDC lines. It's just easier for a country to control their own systems, and it's an easy disconnect without worrying about matching your frequency of other grids.
Okay. Yeah, I kind of have this thing in my mind, and maybe it's true, maybe it's not true, that the United States is just drastically behind where you're at in Europe. Like, have you looked into our different either like generations, storage systems, or transportation systems in a comparative analysis against Europe, and how would you say we do compared to how it is over there?
I would say you guys are abysmal. um, like the technical stuff doesn't change. It hasn't changed in 100 years. You know, turn motor quickly, energy comes out. But the real interesting things, the U.S. as a general rule is failing at for me. It's one of the reasons I actually stopped practicing so heavily in the U.S. and moved to Europe for this. Uh, Things like electrical markets in the U.S. are lacking, we'll say. I like everybody complains about centralized governments and central planning, but I don't know what you would call Missouri's power system, where one group gets to decide how they're building generation, or California with like PSE&G, these are natural monopolies, and the problem is that they're not subject to these market forces necessarily for a few reasons. I don't think they're all bad reasons, but uh, PSE&G is not allowed to raise their prices uh, beyond certain constraints as voted by their customers. Well, if they can't invest in infrastructure so quickly, you see issues where they have to overheat their infrastructure to kind of try and keep running, and then they start fires. And now, who's responsible for that? Is that PSE&G's fault that they can't raise their prices? Is that the customers for not wanting to be just raked over coals because they don't want prices risen? It's complicated. Uh, and it gets even more complicated when I tell you that the theoretically the best way to do that would be to open up the market, as they say, liberalize it, allow more people to bid, allow more people to say, I'll provide energy for this amount of money. That's what Europe did. And one of the weird things, I say weird because it wasn't anticipated, although to me it makes sense, is when you open up this market, there was a massive drop in investment because there was no requirement to invest it. It was just risk. So how do you convince somebody to build more power plants when all they're staring at is risk? Because if I build a wind turbine tomorrow, okay, I've got some great risk, but what if you come up with a new wind turbine design that beats me long term? Over 5 years, you can undersell me. Or I come up with nuclear power suddenly gets government backing. There's just so much risk in this. How do you offset that? And Germany and Europe generally did that in about 2000. And we're starting to see this. It takes about 20 years before the investments start to come back. And you need some government backing to do it. So I don't really have a good answer except to tell you it's complicated, and the US is still further behind because they don't even have these kind of open markets for competition. They're still very much centralized, and that one group decides kind of what's going to happen.
You're giving me something to think about here because I don't exactly want it to go more and more private that people are just going to be trying to make profit off of my energy. I would be a person who, I mean, wishes that we just had a couple of smart people. Well, not a couple of smart people. But this is bringing something interesting up for me to think about. Um,
May I?
I just mostly know that energy generation in the United States is not good at the moment. And yeah.
May I delve in a little further?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the way I'm referring to this, let's say you install solar panels on your house. with a central authority regulating how you can sell and buy, and that central authority in charge of planning new generation, they get to tell you, no, you can't sell. Yes, you can't sell. So that's why I have real issues with central authorities in that perspective. If you have the other side where you show up and you go, I'd like to sell my solar energy, and there's no real infrastructure for you to sell it, you also can't sell it. So you do need some regulatory infrastructure to explain how things can and can't be sold, to make sure that you can have a coherent and operating electrical system like you have now. And there's somewhere in between that. If you ask me what I think the best way is, I think open forum groups that allow you to kind of partner up and sell your energy as groups is really a good way to go. So if you and 600 people decide, I want to build wind turbines, you can get your money together, build your wind turbines, and then sell it on the market. And I think we need vehicles to make this a possibility. So maybe you run a company that says, hey, you can buy electrical energy from us, and if we oversell it and we make money, well, then you get some money back, like an electrical co-op.
Do you think there's any possibility of going towards a not-for-profit energy generation system? Because it really just sounds to me that this is not something that we should be trying to extract every nickel and dime from already poor Americans on.
Oh, I'm with you on that one, but is it possible? Yes. Is it something I think the U.S. is in a position to do? No, I think there's a lot of political hurdles.
Okay.
But I would like that as well.
Okay. Well, you've given me another thing to add on to my list of things that I'd like to get accomplished then.
Hey, it's something I would like to work on too.
In a little bit of a shift, we were kind of talking about, you brought up the copper, you brought up the aluminum, you brought up the steel, and we slightly touched on like storage systems. So I was wondering, can you go through maybe like 5 or 10 of the different ways that are currently in use to store energy at the moment? I know that there's, I mean, I've heard of pumped hydro, I've heard of batteries, I've heard of this kinetic energy, and so forth. So what are some of the ways that we are storing energy at the moment? Which ones are more efficient than others? And what are potentially some of the storage systems of the future that people are working on?
You're going to run out of my expertise real quick here.
Okay.
I can cover what I do know. I know that there's some really interesting ones I like compressed air, which has the benefit of pulling a lot of carbon out of the air, incidentally, because when you compress air, the carbon compresses into itself, and then you just have to clean it so often. It's not perfectly reliable, if you will. It's not 100% efficiency, but it's an interesting one because it pulls pollutants out, which is nice.
So would that mostly
There's
just be like, let's say that you have a huge piston and you're pretty much just you're kind of just like condensing it, or how would help me try to like conceptualize what this would visually look like.
I cannot do that.
Okay.
That's beyond my pay grade.
Okay.
I don't even know what the company's called. I know that about 3 years ago I read the brochure. It was really interesting, but it was too large of a scale for what I needed, and it was untested. So there's not a lot you can do with that.
Okay.
I think my new favorite way of storage is thermal storage. So pumping energy to like underground to deal with the heat gradient, because that allows you to also store heat in the winter. And that's an underappreciated thing, if you ask me. As we talked about solar, you have a peak, energy price goes down. Well, now you have a bunch of energy. What do? You heat up the underground, and then when the sun goes down, you pull that out because there's a big energy differential there. So you've provided relatively free energy to heat something up, and then as the sun goes down, you have this larger temperature gradient which you can extract energy from.
Is that what district heating is, or is district heating something different?
As I understand district heating, that is what Europe uses, and they run basically a second loop of like warm water or something. I'm pretty sure it's water for safety's sake, but they run it through the whole city, and then they heat up the water in mass, and as you need it, you turn it on or off, and you have little meters in your house, and that tells you how many calories you're using. So then you're priced off the calorie. This is much better when we used a lot more older methods of generation, because you run a turbine, it heats up. Now you have hot water. What do you do with it? Well, sell it to people.
Okay. Yeah, sorry, I was reading something from chat and
That's cool.
I got out of the way. Uh,
I'll tell you what, I like district cooling a lot more. It's about 40% efficient because you can get really impressive large scale cooling, and you can basically provide air conditioner at twice the efficiency to people in
yeah,
cities, and all you need
so
to do is use water.
a few of the papers that you sent over to me were dealing with air conditioning or with air cooling or something. So is this like a topic that you're like particularly generating an interest in?
Oh, God, yes.
Yeah.
I sent you a paper, The Future of Cooling by the IEA,
Right.
and
I
in
tried
it,
to read through them.
it's okay. And in it, page 59, I think. Let's check the bottom. I don't know. My PDF viewer says 59/60.
Okay.
In 2050, they're estimating about 8,000 million units of households with at least one air conditioner, which
Wow.
is more than twice what we have in 2016.
Hmm.
And like we're looking at more air conditioners than we even use cooling today in the world. And that's a huge energy bump. And I don't know the exact number, but every degree centigrade increased globally, you're looking at an increase of air conditioners in the world, but it's nonlinear. So 2 degrees is not twice as much; it's like 3 times as much.
Hmm.
So we have this issue where we're using fossil fuels and we're not adding new renewables faster than we're retiring them. We're just kind of doing it equally, and it's really concerning for me. How do we deal with this increased demand we're going to see that's not even consistent because your air conditioner is not consistent? How do you deal with that in a world of more distributed and intermittent operation?
Yeah. Yeah. It's actually, man, when you really begin to think about what these things mean for the future, this is why sometimes I can't think about them for too long. Um,
Yeah.
I do want to talk about retrofitting buildings in a moment for, trying to make like a little bit of this, the cooling and heating a little bit easier. But before we go to that one, what are some of the different cooling systems? So you mentioned district cooling, you mentioned like in window cooling. Um, and I know that the in window cooling, you have the CFC problem, you have the HFC problem, you have the refrigerants, you have not a good way to recycle them. So where do you kind of want to frame the conversation around what is in use now, what can be recycled, what has been replaced, what's been improved, and what can we keep improving?
Ooh. So there's a lot that goes into air conditioners and stuff that is interesting. So one thing I didn't even know was they changed compressor types, and that saw an increase in stability and efficiency, which is just crazy to think about. That like scroll compressors are that effective. Um, I know that I really don't like the idea of the greenhouse gases they use, but it's I don't know what else to do about it. I know we're working on that. Refrigerants aren't really my specialty. Uh, I'm much more familiar with electronegative insulators like SF6, which we can talk about. But
Yeah,
uh,
explain even what that is.
we'll get there in just a second.
Okay.
I will finish the AC one with most of it can be recycled, and if it's being recycled properly, you should be able to capture those refrigerants and reuse them. I don't know why you wouldn't be able to. That being said, you have to have a reason to recycle them properly. uh, SF6. Let's talk about this. If I do one thing in my life before I die, and I get somebody to seriously take switching SF6 to I like CF3I. I'm going to use the chemistry names because that's about all I know them by. I'll be happy. SF6 is about 200,000 times worse than CO2
Wow.
as a greenhouse gas. It's bonkers. It's hard to explain how horrific it is. And it's also about the only thing we have that makes a lot of our modern grid work in cities. It's you can take like a 20-foot gap that you need to hold between two pieces of electrical wire and move it down to like 3 feet. It's just amazing. So you use it in breakers, you use it in insulated bus, and that's really helpful for the grid. But it's if there's a leak, it's really horrendous for the environment. So there's been understanding in the fields about this. And on the research fields, we've been looking at CF3I, which is about zero point 0.5 times greenhouse gas of CO2.
Wow.
It's,
Okay.
yeah, and it's comparable to SF6 in research studies. So it needs to be like really tested. And that was one of the things with my current job is when we were talking about hiring me, like I was making it clear that I need to be able to talk to research and try and get some R&D on this one because it's such a big deal to me.
Yeah,
So
this is something that I had never heard about, and I appreciate you giving your time here to just some of the questions that I'm asking are basic, maybe some of them are a little bit more complex. So
as long as you understand my answers, I think I'm doing my job.
I'll have to go back through potentially, and listen through the VOD, but I think it has been helpful so far. Um, the one thing that I was talking about a little bit before you came on, I brought up just one skyscraper. I brought up the Burj Khalifa that's in Dubai, and my critique of the 20th century skyscraper is you build a huge glass box that lets all of this sunlight in, and not only where you're building them, let's say that okay, it's not as bad to build one in New York City as it is to build one in Dubai, but you throw one up in the desert. It's 131 stories tall, or however many it is, and all day you're just getting beamed in all of the sunlight. So all they're doing is running AC, running AC, running AC, running AC. Um, so I wanted to ask a question of: is there any movement in Europe at the moment to retrofit buildings of any of these like skyscrapers or even domestic homes or so forth? Let's get better energy efficient glass panes. Are they putting green roofs on buildings or whatever? What's the current state of this in Europe at the moment? Final thing before we go, I did see Milan. I think a year or two ago, they won one of the architectural designs for the year, where they're now beginning to build certain towers with trees on the outside of them. It
Oh
it
my
does
God. Yeah.
it does
Those
some. Go ahead.
those apartments are $2.5 million each. I looked at them.
Is that how much they are? Yeah. But
Yeah.
it's good for air purification. It's good for cooling. It provides better shade and so forth. So what are things like in Europe on this front at the moment?
There are definitely motions to fix these things. This is again outside of my expertise, but I can tell you what I've read about. So one of the big ones that I've seen is building like these green spaces, as you said, they help with cooling, but you can also build wind efficient, if you will say, designs so that you can put like wind turbines in the middle of a building and you get a really cool looking building that also kind of produces some energy. And because you can design the building, you can force certain types of airflow for optimal usage. Uh,
So, okay, so I before you go on any further, you've given me an idea here, so I want to like ask you this one. So, are you saying that we could take potentially wind turbines in the windy city of Chicago, maybe, and like, can we suspend them in between skyscrapers, like X feet up, in order to, kind of like use the flow through?
Absolutely. My wife is in love with what's I believe is called a vertical wind turbine. And instead of having all this horizontal space, it's just really skinny and then tall. And it rotates like this.
Hmm.
And you could put those just on almost anything, really.
Mm-hmm.
And as my wife tells me, they work great in like cities where you can just put a bunch next to each other because they feed off each other. They create turbulent flow in a way that is beneficial to generation.
You just you mentioned turbulent flow. So I saw a study, I think from Stanford University, and rather than building all of the wind turbines in a straight line, they're kind of offsetting them
Yeah.
by like a degree and a half or two. Could you like quickly kind of explain why you would want to do that little bit of offset? You alluded to it, but I think you're going to be able to expand on it as to why it would be better.
Yeah. I will first preface this with I'm going to butcher some terminology. I'm sure this is not again not my field exactly, but it's a field of interest. So when you have a wind turbine, the wind hits it and it doesn't go straight through it, it bounces off it and it creates a break like a boat. So then you can put wind turbines also on that air ripple, if you will, so that they get the most of that disturbance or the least, depending on what you need from your turbine design. And you can optimally place your turbines so that the lead turbine basically creates more favorable conditions behind it. So even if your front turbine doesn't really work, the rest of them operate at a higher efficiency overall. It's
This is
a
kind of like
really
the
interesting thing.
the opposite of NASCAR. In
Yeah,
NASCAR, you want to draft right behind. So, but and I guess, but you can kind of use like NASCAR to make the analogy. If you're wanting to, save gasoline when you're a NASCAR driver, you want to get right in the slipstream. Same if you're I'm a big cycling fan, and
yeah.
one thing that when I finally got into cycling, I realized like the Tour de France teams have 5 people, and there's one person that's allowed to win. The other people are supposed to ride in front. That way the person who's designed to win sits in the slipstream or so forth. But it is interesting to think that now with the wind turbines you want to offset them to take the opposite advantage of what you'd be doing while driving. And that was something that I thought was kind of cool, how there's more and more efficiencies being developed even just within wind generation.
Discussing that one, I don't want to leave this topic. It's really interesting. So Google and I forget where they used a different method of statistical analysis on their wind turbines, and that allowed them to increase their profits on the market by 30%, which basically means that they can increase their understanding of when they will generate electricity and can competitively uh, bid that. So they have confidence and are correct more than 30% of the time. And that's a really big understanding and like real world scenario of just stoichiometric analysis benefiting the use of renewables. One of the big arguments people say is, oh, you don't know when the wind will blow. Well, Google's showing they do know when the wind will blow, and they know with such certainty they can promise to take certain strains off the electrical grid that otherwise coal would use. And they don't fail or they would lose a lot of money. That's how the bidding process works. But no, they make money. So,
Yeah, man, this whole making money thing on energy, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I know that this can't go on forever, but I know that they're gonna try to make it go on forever, and it kind of like it just crushes my soul. um,
okay, but can we talk about the
yeah, go.
markets themselves? Because they're,
Fair.
even if we don't use the markets with money, markets just describe things, right? They're not
Mm.
necessarily money related. If you can bid on a market to take this power from a CO2 producing method, that effectively you're still dropping CO2.
Hmm.
And that's kind of what you need if you want large penetrations of CO2 neutral or really low CO2 generation.
Yeah, no, and you're right. I was being
I'm not going to
obtuse.
sit here and tell you I love the method of pricing energy with money.
Hmm.
Again, I just have to talk about what we do.
Yeah, I'm trying to look through. Oh, I did want to ask. So one question about like the storage. I've been trying to look into these kinetic storing mechanisms where it's kind of like a huge crane system. You lift like a 35-ton block, and then when you need the energy, you drop like the 35-ton block. Are there any of these that have been built in Germany? And is this something that they're going to be kind of using more as like an alternative to pumped hydro if you're not near a water source?
Oof, I don't know about Germany using big blocks. I know we use a bunch of batteries. We've got gigawatts of batteries in North Rhine-Westphalia being tested right now to see how they can alleviate strains on the power grid. That's a big deal. Uh, I know that the Netherlands is using electric vehicles to balance the grid. They've got some stuff. I have so many questions I want to ask, but they're all like really detail oriented. So I don't want to bring them up here, but they're able to use the grids to the grid and the car interface to help balance the grid instead of using like peaker plants and burning more fossil fuels. They can kind of shift car energy bills and do that. And
Would that kind
I
of
think
be
that's
where
great.
like you power your house off your car type thing almost?
I don't know if I'd recommend powering your house off your car, but yeah, it's the same idea.
Okay. Um,
So maybe it's worth noting that if you charge your car to 100 and you leave it for 4 hours, it hurts your battery more than if you do 1,000 cycles from like 50 to 51%. Like one of them is worse for your battery and
okay.
it's charging your battery.
Is that why a lot of our cell phones they tell you like don't overcharge them, don't leave them, on like to overcharge or
Yeah, uh, don't overcharge and don't deep cycle. There's a lot of math involved in the background on your phone to try and stop you from doing it anyway. But if you plug your phone in and you just leave it plugged in the whole time, that's actually worse for your phone than if you don't charge it for 2 days and
okay.
then plug it back in.
All right. I'm trying to run through some of my questions here.
Sure, I got about 15 more minutes.
Wonderful. Yeah, I had figured that we might be able to be together for an hour. I saw a new paper recently, and some of my friends were making a little bit of fun of it. Some, not as much fun of it. Some places are looking at putting floating solar panels on the already existing dams and the hydroelectric dams that exist. Have you heard anything about this? And obviously, like you're not going to want to do it if it's going to kill everything that's down underneath it. But I guess like the paper is trying to say that, well, you already have the surface area there, you already have the pumped hydro, you already have like a good storage mechanism, so you can actually gain like a lot more efficiency by having it around this area. Have you heard anything about this of trying to combine multiple different styles of power generation within one system?
Um, not not the way you described, but I have. Uh, my favorite was somebody's. I forget which or city it was. I think it was the Pacific Northwest somewhere. They have a big open air water thing, and what they used to do was they had a bunch of balls on it, and as the water goes down, the balls just kind of lay on the edge, and as the water comes up, kind of the balls float higher, and they replaced that with they put solar panels in the middle, so it's not like the whole thing,
Mm-hmm.
but it allows more or less constant generation. That's the kind of stuff I'm into. The issue with dams, of course, is that the temperature gradients actually kill a lot of the water life. So I definitely want somebody to figure out if it murders the fish. But if we decide that ecologically it's no different than the dam itself, I think that's a genius idea.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really too big on building more hydroelectric dams. Kind of like you're saying,
Yeah.
it's mostly an ecological ticking time bomb that's eventually gonna,
I mean,
you're
Tom
not.
Salk was horrific.
Can you say what happened?
Yeah. So in Missouri, on Johnson shut-ins, was just to say obliterated is to undersell it. It was just removed from the map completely, and it was like a fairly natural resource. And Tomsock, which was a hydroelectric battery, failed and just destroyed the town in the way. I don't remember how many casualties there were, but there were a few. And then this just a natural, I don't know how artificially natural, but a natural piece of like waterscape and rocks and stuff in Missouri was just removed. It wasn't even destroyed. It was just gone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my biggest concern with hydroelectric dams are you're not having the minerals float downstream. You're disturbing fish populations. You have to build your salmon chutes and
Mm-hmm.
and all of these different things.
Real big deals.
Um, I I had this one question, and it might be shifting very quickly away from we were. Somebody wanted to ask about aqueous sodium battery technology, and there was another
It's just a
question.
battery.
Just about it. Okay, and there was
I
another
mean, it's a
one.
different type of battery, but it's a battery.
Okay, and another one was a BESS energy storage systems. These were some
That's
things that I.
shorthand for any battery system.
Oh, okay. Well,
I
those are
mean,
very simple.
I've used it as shorthand for lithium ion and heat pumps, and the people I was talking to didn't flinch.
Okay, very very easy enough then. What are a couple things that you wanted to talk about then? I'll kind of give you like the floor as we have like 10 minutes left then.
Sure. Well, I want to talk about rotational inertia,
Okay.
if you
Yeah.
will. So, what generally happens, this came up when I was talking with the nuclear proponent that you had, I want to say a week or two ago.
Okay.
And I was talking about flywheels just being spinning pieces of mass that store energy. And he said that like this is just rotational inertia, and this is what generators do. And that hurt my soul. And I wanted to say that they're very different. Flywheels are much closer to batteries than a large spinning mass. Uh,
Yeah. Can you explain a little bit more about like this would be to an individual like myself?
sure. So right now your grid operates at 60 hertz. You're in America, 60 times a second. It goes up and down to zero with a sine wave. Just so far, just simple math. There's a generator hooked up, spinning thousands of RPMs in order to balance out the poles which make the electricity to 60 hertz. If you have a flywheel hooked up and you need energy, you can take some of the rotational energy of the flywheel off the flywheel and kind of input energy into the system. And you actually asked specifically about this in another method. What did you call it? Converter interfaced generation.
Okay. Um, I
It's
I potentially did. This is so above my pay grade. I'm just trying to
no
do what I
worries,
can.
man. So basically, it's an energy source behind a converter, and
Okay.
converters have no inertia whatsoever, but they can create virtual inertia or artificial inertia. And that's the difference. Is a flywheel can be used to force inertia in a method that a rotating mass can't.
Okay.
Right now, your grid probably has about 5 seconds of inertia behind it, and that does not mean if everything broke, it would run for 5 seconds. The math does not work that way. But in general, it means that there's, I don't know how to explain this one. You don't even have 5 seconds of operation for it, but it's just it's a mathematical expression that comes out in seconds. So uh, you're spinning coal plants and everything like that have so much weight behind them because they're big spinning motors,
Hmm.
whereas your battery has no weight behind it. You pull from your battery or not, you don't. It's not going to fight that change really. So that's what a rotational inertia is. And as we get more renewables, DERs or whatever, DER is the proper term where I live at least, distributed energy resource. You see almost no inertia coming in as well. So in order to deal with that and create a grid that we're kind of used to using, we're creating virtual inertia with like batteries or load shedding. Demand side management is another thing I'm in love with. It's the idea that you can turn things on and off in order to change your load, which provides an equivalent to this rotating inertia. Uh,
Okay. I think so. Let me try to like say this in a way that I would understand.
yeah,
Because I'm just gonna say like coal, nuclear, and natural gas probably do like a lot of what steam and
yeah,
they're turning like turbines and so forth. They have a way of creating pressure that can create this rotational that you're talking about. Whereas the DERs are really like it's a much different form of energy generation where you're not having the kind of like the intense pressure. Is this
that's exactly true.
okay? So then I do
The
okay. So I understand a little bit then, and it's a shift of the way that the electricity would be generated, meaning it's also a shift of how it needs to be stored and then distributed.
Yeah. That being said, they use uh, Steam because it's way more effective than other methods.
Okay,
But there was a joke in my bachelor's that my professor made is that we've been building energy systems for hundreds of years
and
or for
still
over
using
100
steam.
years. Steam is the only thing we've ever found that works, and
Yeah,
that's not true anymore. But it's a good joke.
yeah. I think I've even stumbled across that one in a place or two. Is there anything else that you kind of like want to finish up with? And the final question too that I would be asking is, what exactly do you think that you'll be doing in your 1 year, like your 5 year, your 10 year, as far as like what type of work you'd like to be doing? Do you think that you'll be working with government agencies? Will you be working private sector or so forth?
I will tell you my 5 year, my whatever,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't know if I have anything I want to talk about necessarily. Some of my we'll say theories are out there and they're scientifically sound, but everybody looks at me like nobody will ever agree with
Okay.
you. So next year, I'll be working on the integration of offshore wind and renewables with the rest of Europe. I'll
Mm-hmm.
be I'll be overseeing a lot of the HVDC work somewhere in some way, shape, or form. Uh, that's fantastic. That's increasing renewables in the world. That's one of my big things. 5 years, probably something similar. I'm going to be trying to get more of a view on providing energy to people who don't have energy already. So if you just gave me infinite money, I would be redirecting capital to provide energy to developing countries because we've seen that that makes their life better
Mm-hmm.
and has compounding effects on capital creation, if you will.
Does
And I
it?
know we don't want to talk about money, but money is also a good shorthand for building
Oh
things.
yeah, for sure. Does it seem like offshore wind is really going to be kind of like the next DER that's going to be taking off then?
Yeah, it's one of the most effective DERs we've ever seen. It's you're seeing 40% capacity factors on these things, and nuclear power is like 90. It's not 100. Capacity
Okay.
factor is how much you get based on what you kind of expect, like
Mm-hmm.
the nameplate. So yeah, there's aside from that, like it's out of the way. It's not really a bother. There's not a lot of NIMBY on it unless you're Trump in Scotland. And
Yeah,
then there's
Well,
Go ahead.
I did want to ask about the offshore wind. Are there any real like ecological problems? I mean, I know that maybe like a little bit of like birds or so forth, but I tried to look at underwater tidal generation, and I quickly found out that the sound pollution from it is just it doesn't really seem to like work out. But I haven't exactly heard too many problems with offshore wind. So if there were any, could you quickly say what may be there?
Birds are a big deal because the wind turbines are white, and when they paint them, bird deaths drop really quickly, which is just hilarious. And I would have never thought about it, but somebody tested it.
Paint them which color?
Any other color.
Any color
Just,
besides white, it does better.
well, I'm sure you can't paint them like sky blue, but the problem is they kind of look like clouds, right?
Okay, I guess I could see that. Yeah.
So I think they're putting like I think they put like red strips on them, like just I don't know what you
Interesting.
call them, but like paint strips on them, stuff like that. Um, yeah, I also I think offshore is great because there's a lot of really cheap land. It's not ideal because it puts your energy resources in a quasi precarious situation for like wartime. And we've talked about, I think DERs are a
Mm.
great
Mm.
national security thing. But at the same time, if you're planning everything based on war, you're not planning a society of prosper. You're planning a society that's like rationing food constantly. So I don't know if the war is necessarily a good argument, but even the Department of Defense in the US agrees that renewable energies are a national defense issue.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah. Well, I really enjoyed everything. Is there?
hey,
Do you want to like close up with anything at all, or do you maybe have like a question or two for me? Not that I mean I'm going to be able to, give probably like
now
an
I
expert
bother
position
you
on
with questions all the time. I told you I'm around here. uh, let's see. Is there anything I wasn't clear on for you?
No, there were like some terminologies that I have to like go back through and listen to again, and like trying to process and absorb everything all at one time is it can be somewhat difficult. But no, I think that it was a really good breakdown for sure, and I like to be able to talk to different people and try to like platform kind of different ideas and so forth, and eventually maybe I can work up like a decent knowledge base. I view myself as like a pinch hitter, or not a pinch hitter, like a utility player.
Hmm.
I'm not the best third baseman. I'm not the best right fielder, but I could probably kind of like function in multiple different roles. So I really enjoyed it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Uh, that's all I got. Have a good month until Thanksgiving, I guess. Don't go out to the buffets. Don't be like my grandma.
Yeah, I actually have not been in a store since March 13th or so. I'm pretty good at avoiding the whole thing. I'm lucky I work in my office. I do a little bit of grocery delivery. So yeah, thank you, Rob, very much for your time. I do appreciate it. Hopefully we can maybe get together in the future when I have a little bit more knowledge and questions. And have a
Sure.
wonderful day.
I defend my dissertation in January. So if you want to get together and just talk about that and what I found out, we can do that too.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. If you want to see the channel at all, YouTube subscribers, you can go to twitch.tv/touring news, and that's where I do all my live broadcasts. So thank you and have a great day.
Thanks, guys. Bye.